Carving is an extremely absorbing process. I developed an interest in Celtic design, I suppose many years ago, but then it began to accelerate maybe 15, 12 years ago. Celtic design has all sorts of variety of shapes and characters, but there's a strong history of Celtic crosses, and it's a theme that I found developing, both from the patterns and the imagery. And for me, it mixes a lot of different elements. Obviously, I'm working with wood, and there's the life of the wood. There's all the history of Celtic design and the craftsmen who produced it over the centuries. But also, of course, the story behind the cross and the story of the crucifixion and the story of the life of Jesus, and the fact that Jesus himself was a carpenter. I find it challenging, but also absorbing and fulfilling, because every single stroke of the chisel requires a decision. It's something you can't work out in detail in advance. Exactly how shallow or deep does this cut have to go? I enjoy coming up with ideas. I enjoy working on design, which I do sometimes in the workshop, sometimes in the house. Matching that design or that idea to a particular piece of wood and working out the final design and how it's going to fit to that piece of wood. The roughing out, where I can begin to see what's going to come. The detailed carving, finishing it off, and then sharing it up with other people. Other people's reaction to it is always important to me. One of the excitements of the process of carving is that there's an element of faith in what the end product is going to look like, because that particular wood looked very dry and not very interesting through most of the carving. But when I finished it and used an oil on the surface for that particular piece, it brought up a wonderful, lustrous, deep red colour with a beautiful grain, which I'd seen in the original piece of wood but had more or less forgotten about until this work was finished. Carving crosses makes me think about the whole story, about the crucifixion, not just the crucifixion of Jesus, but crucifixion of others by people in power, execution and killing practiced by people in power. And the very fact that I am carving that feels to me to involve me in those issues, to associate me more closely with that particular crucifixion, but also with other similar acts where people suffer, where people die, often unjustly, and raises for me questions of what we should do about that. How do we act to try and address those injustices, to try and help those who are oppressed? How does the money I spend, how does the life I live impact on others around the world? What does that Christian faith mean in practice? What do we do about it? All that gets tied up with the cross, the story it was involved in then, and the story it's involved in now. I started thinking about carving things associated with Jesus and with other aspects of religion. And one of the ideas that emerged was simply a carving of hands. And I came across a piece of wood that suited that bowl shape. It's actually a piece of Scots pine. But that enabled me to make those hands a little bit larger than life. So the actual shape is primarily inspired by the position I myself take up when I receive communion, that cupping of the hands. And I come to think of those as not just representing my own hands, but also representing the hands of God. And that is I find that a very moving idea. After all, there's that wonderful saying from the 16th century, God has no hands on earth but yours. God acts on earth through us.